Thanks for joining us this morning. You are, I think, the beneficiaries of 3 previous coffee conversations that have each had their own unique challenges. We're starting to figure this thing out, and we're starting to get a good momentum here. So I hope today should be very productive. We got an exciting topic, one that's both timely and on folks' minds and constantly evolving. So that's what we're looking for to bring to the membership here. As you've probably been already made aware, these are informal conversations. If you have slides to share, I think either Rhea or probably me can give you control to share if you want. But of course, we are looking to keep things kind of brief. We have a 45-minute window that can bleed into the hour if the Q&A goes that long, but we're definitely looking at spurring some conversation among those who are on here for the content. So let's just go through a quick audio check for everybody. And if you say maybe your name and your organization and a few words, and we'll get everybody cleared.
Oh, that's a good point. Should we rename ourselves to have our organization? That might be helpful. I'll do that. So
we got Rhea. BJ, would you like to go?
Yeah, good morning, Brian. Brian Sinwell here in Louisville. Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. So I think I'm all good to go.
Great. Loud and clear. Dan?
Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Dan Garn from Charlotte Douglas. I'm a noise abatement officer. I also feel woefully underdressed this morning, so I apologize for that, but looking forward to this.
Dan, do you at least have your coffee?
I mean, I got mine.
All right, Suzanne.
Good morning, everyone. Susanna Kush with the Piedmont Triad Airport Authority in Greensboro, North Carolina. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Mr. Rufus. Would you please unmute, sir?
Ooh, okay, that happened by mistake. After all these months, right? Good morning, everyone. Rufus James, Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport Director.
Glad to have you, Rufus. So
right.
we'll
and we do have slides to share.
We do? Okay. How do you want to do that?
I'm A-okay if this, let's see, did that work?
Yep.
Do you have a preference if it is left like this with, I know it has the header and everything, but sometimes when I change into presentation mode, it pulls up the wrong screen that it ends up sharing.
I don't have a preference. However you want to do it.
Can everybody see this all right, though? I don't want to.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
yeah, one question. Were you
any...
planning on having this during our intro time or during the conversation itself?
This is for during the intro time.
Okay, cool.
So it's going to go Brian, then Suzanne, then Dan, and then finally Rufus. And then I was going to stop here for the intros and then share again if we get to this kind of topic about non-acoustic factors of annoyance. This is kind of here if we need it. It was a study that was done in Heathrow and everything for things that you can control versus not, and sensitivity to noise. And then at the end, when we were saying goodbye or wrapping up, I was just going to put this up. So if anybody needed to take a screenshot of it, but I also don't have to do that. So it kind of, if we're talking right up to the end and we just say bye and it closes, that's fine. But I have all of this here. But for the intros, I will go slide by slide, so you have that to kind of help set your airport, what it's been doing over the past few months, and just kind of level set everybody for it. Does that sound like it works for everybody?
Sounds good.
Okay, cool.
Rhea, I'm going to start out with when we get going, probably about a minute after the hour. I'll get started with just a brief introduction, thanking our sponsor, plugging future coffee conversation sponsors if there's any corporate committee members on, and then I'll hand it over to you pretty quickly. Once you wrap up, I'll plug the coffee conversation again, thank the sponsor, and then that'll be it. And then it's all being recorded. So I think John Kerrigan's going to upload that. He usually uploads it within about a week for folks to listen to afterwards if you want to distribute it to anyone.
Okay.
Hey, Bob, it's Cody. I see you're on the line and muted, but I just want to thank you for connecting me with the social media folks to get the LinkedIn post updated.
Glad to help.
Nice prop. What's that off of?
Oh yeah, that's an old one. I'm not sure. It was given to me from a friend of a friend of a grandfather of a friend. So it was found in a barn. Let's just say that here in Kentucky.
Yeah, cool. It's probably not with that nick in it, but
Yeah, right. It's a heavy one.
Good morning, Holly Barron's on from Richmond Executive Airport.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Doing great.
very well. How are you, Holly?
Doing well, thank you. Trying to recover from yesterday. We had a fallen Coast Guard specialist come in, so it was a pretty busy, stressful day, but everything turned out, so.
Good, good.
Well, it's 10 a.m., folks. We're going to give it just another minute for folks to filter in here, and then we'll get started. Thanks for being with us this morning. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started here. Hello, everyone. I'm Cody Parr. I'm with HDR, and this is the fourth installment of the SEC AAAE's Coffee Conversations hosted by the Corporate Committee. Today's coffee conversation is sponsored by HMMH. Thank you for your sponsorship, and I will turn things over to Rhea Hanrahan to get us started.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This is going to be more of an informal talk and discussion. One of the things, we have a great panel with you who are going to introduce themselves. One of the things I'm sure we're all very used to hearing is about how the pandemic has influenced operations at individual airports around the country. So we're going to take a little bit of a different look at that and also see how noise complaints are being have been affected by the pandemic and the recovery that we're experiencing here. So hopefully a little bit of a different spin, and please chime in. You could use the raise your hand feature if that's at the bottom, or type in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourselves if you're busy doing something else. But we really want this to be a multiple conversation and discussion to figure out what's going on at your airport, what kind of questions you have based on the lovely panel that we have today. So There's a couple slides that I am going to bring up as we do our introductions. So let's see. There we go. And then so we're going to be discussing the new normal of the aircraft noise complaints for our panel. And first up, I'm going to turn the presentation or the speaking role over to Brian to give a little bit of background about himself and his airport.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Brian Sinwell. I'm Senior Vice President here at Louisville Regional Airport Authority. And we have two airports on our control, the International Airport and Bowman Field. And so my responsibilities really go through a list of planning, engineering, construction, operations, maintenance, IT, and also manage the folks over at Bowman Field. So that's kind of where I am in my category here in Louisville. So good morning, everybody.
Brian, can you give a little bit of a detail on what we have up here as far as the data goes with your 2019 and 2020 operations and then your complaints there? So we're going to try and talk about that real quick, and then we'll bring everybody's faces back up and go into regular conversation mode.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll roll into it a little bit here. Well, in Louisville, if you're not aware of what goes on here in Louisville at the International Airport, we are home to UPS Worldport headquarters. So what that means is the center of our airfield is Worldport, and they are kind of the lead operator here at the airfield. So we are very much in tune with noise, and we operate primarily at night, obviously with cargo operations. I'd say 60% of our operations are cargo, and most of that obviously happens at night. So we have a very robust program for noise compatibility. We've gone through years of relocation, almost 3,000 residences that we've relocated, 150 businesses throughout the years. We're active in our noise sound insulation program. We've sound insulated 540 homes. We have 550 more on tap. So we are on the forefront of taking care of our noise around the airfield. And what you see on the screen here is kind of a correlation for operations per complaint. And I would say that, looking at our numbers there, and you just break it down, if look at it a little closer, we don't really have a direct correlation between number of ops and complaints. It's kind of a different animal here. We control our airfield in different ways with contraflow and using a daytime reverse flow, trying to keep the most noise on areas that we've either sound insulated or are free of residential areas. So we do a lot to manipulate, I guess, the noise around our field. So the correlation here is somewhat spotty as far as ops per complaint, but it's interesting to look at the numbers, and we could dive deeper in if you'd like later on. But we don't really see the correlation so much, just based upon other things that we do around the field to try to mitigate our noise.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think you're unique in that the operations I've seen across the country don't tend to be a direct comparison with, you have a big operations drop off. You're not going to have the same kind of drop off in complaints. They either lag or there's some kind of other things that your individual communities experience that kind of influence that more. So yeah, thank you so much, Brian.
You're welcome.
All right, next I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susanna Kusch, the Aviation Planning Manager with the Piedmont Triad Airport Authority. We're in Central North Carolina, serving Greensboro, High Point, and Winston-Salem. And I've been at the airport for over 2 years now, managing the airport's noise program, which includes, we finished up a Part 150 update last year, and we have an ongoing residential sound insulation program. And to give you a little bit of background about the airport, passenger-wise, we're a small hub, but we have a lot of other stuff going on. So we are the FedEx Mid-Atlantic hub. So they operate a nighttime sort here. And as of December last year, they started operating a daytime sort as well. I guess cargo has kind of benefited from the pandemic, and that's been good news for us. We also have a large third-party MRO here, Hayco Americas, and their business has been doing well too, because we had, I think it was something like 50 aircraft stored here last year, and they were kind of maintaining them while in storage. To talk a little bit about the data and this chart here, as you can see, our operations, probably like a lot of airports, dropped off pretty significantly last April and kind of have crawled back up since then. FedEx did suspend their nighttime sort here from April through September last year. And on the other side of the chart here on the right side, the complaints, you can kind of see it generally, we have a pretty low level of complaints, which seem to get even a little bit lower during this reduced traffic during last summer and most of last year. While traffic was down, I think maybe another thing that could have played into that was aircraft retirements. The MD-80 left the fleet. I wasn't getting those complaints about the 5 a.m. flight to Atlanta anymore. But you can kind of see a couple months where we have spikes in complaints, and we can trace that back to usually nighttime military training operations. So for example, that big spike you see in May, there were 2 nights in a row we had a military E8 here doing touch and goes and training activities. And that's kind of the military equivalent to a Boeing 707. So real loud plane late at night, it was disruptive. We're getting back to normal here in terms of operations. June was the first month that we exceeded 2019 levels. It was up 5% from June 2019. And you can see we only had 12 complaints all month. So at least in our community, maybe someone like Brian, it's not a direct correlation between number of operations and the complaints we're seeing. It's maybe unexpected noise or nighttime noise that's more bothersome and annoying to our neighbors.
Very interesting. Yeah, so the operations, just looking at that overall, if someone else was to look at this data, because I was going to ask you, why was there that big spike in May? And so knowing your airport, knowing what's going on and what's bothering your community, military operations at the end, having that as an explanation for what's going on there is nice to, I guess, get a gauge on. And then the other question I had, so you said with the retirement of the MD-80s, so that 5 a.m. flight, I'm assuming, is still happening, just with a different aircraft type now. And so you're not seeing the complaints that you normally would because it's a quieter aircraft.
Yeah, Delta has kind of replaced those with 737s or 717s, which are quieter. And I don't think people are noticing those as much as they used to with the MD-80s.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dan now to talk about his airports and the data that we have on this screen here.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Garden. I'm a noise abatement specialist here at Charlotte Douglas in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm coming here to the conversation with about 10 years of airport experience, 4 years of on-the-ground work with airside operations, and about 6 years of noise experience. CLT is my second airport. I've been here for about 4 years, and prior to that, I worked at Teterboro in Teterboro, New Jersey, where I assisted with the Part 150 program, actually along with HMMH. I'm also joined here by my dog, who loves to interrupt virtual meetings. So just in advance, I'd like to apologize for his behavior. He is behaving at the moment, but it's not uncommon for him to get on camera. So when measured in terms of operations, CLT is consistently one of the busiest airports in the world. On a typical, what we would call pre-COVID day, we like to say that we have an average of 1,600 operations per day. This does vary a little bit, of course, but in general, 1,600 is really our main talking point. And when you look at the early parts of 2020 here on the left side of my slide, we do see what I assume is a record high for CLT. It's certainly the highest one-day total since I've been there, of a day of 1,730 flights. You'll notice that just a few weeks later, in late March, we see the first impact. Kind of difficult to see on the graph, but between March 22nd and March 28th, which is just 1 week in March, flight numbers dropped 49% to a day where we had under 700 flights. This continued downward through April, to our one-day low total of April 25th, where we had only 468 daily flights, representing a 70% drop from our average day. So just like everybody else here, our flights did rebound. And you can see as that graph continues, there's numerous spikes up and down. Finally, here by the 2/3 of the way through 2021, we're pretty close back to our daily average of 1,600. Just a few weeks ago, we hit our post-COVID, I'm using that in quotes, post-COVID high of 1,595 flights per day. back in June. So that's really kind of the easy part. Complaints, of course, are a much more difficult kind of scenario to explain. And you'll notice in the graph on the right hand of this slide, there's a lot of spikes. It seems like almost every day it goes up and then down. And really what that relates to is our traffic flow. During our north flow traffic days, aircraft fly over significantly less people, so we have less complaints, no matter how many operations we have. On days when we're in the south flow, we fly over more people, specifically in areas that are, I guess I could say, prone to submitting complaints. So we typically see spikes there. There's really a lot I could talk about. So in the interest of time, let me just stop there. And, you know, if you want to come back to me, I can give some more information. But I feel like that's a pretty good place to pause for now.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I do have, we're always talking about complaints here, so the number of complaints, but I would assume with your airport, the number of complainants, so people complaining, is a much lower and smaller number. And have you seen an increase in the number of people complaining, not necessarily the frequency with which they do?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So you really nailed it there. Typically, we receive somewhere around 50 to 100,000 complaints per year. This is from a super small number of people. So for 2020, for the entire year, just 230 residents complained. Now, bear in mind, Charlotte has a metro area of 2.5 million residents. So a very, very small number, thousands of percents are issuing complaints. So we actually did see a drop in 2020. And it's very difficult to tell from this graph, and it actually took some math to see it. But when we look at the average daily difference in number of operations in 2020, we typically saw an average drop of 30% year over year. So yes, of course, in the early days of the pandemic, we had a huge drop and it came back. So when you look at that year over year, we experienced about an average drop of 30%. That number actually correlates directly to our complainant numbers. We saw a reduction in our number of complainants by about 30%, and a total reduction in the amount of complaints that they were issuing of about 30%. So there are a lot of factors. It's certainly not a direct correlation, but there is a little bit of, I would say, relative correlation between those three factors.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you for that. All right, our final panel member for today's coffee conversation, I'm going to turn it over to Rufus. Let me see, are you on mute? Oh, you're on mute, Rufus.
Let's see. There we go. Sorry about that.
No problem.
After all these months, I'd be used to this now. Good morning, everyone. Rufus James, Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport. Let's see. In addition to the airport, we also have a downtown helistop. Oversee the day-to-day operations of both the helistop and the airport, as well as a 200-acre industrial air park, which is fairly developed, not having any more vacant parcels. So I'm very grateful for that. We have had a noise abatement program in place for, I'm going to say, what seems close to almost 40 years now. But the airport has been in this business for a long time of dealing with resident concerns and so forth. Since the ban of the stage 2 aircraft, we've seen a significant reduction in noise complaints. I want to say it's almost a 25% reduction. And throughout the last 6 months with COVID and so forth, the numbers you're seeing here on the chart, you can see what the monthly operations are, you know, anywhere between 14,000 and 16,000. Our noise calls, and I'm going to say calls because in most cases, I think when we look at who's calling and who wants a call back, I think the calls are just to say that, you know, why did an airplane fly over my home, or It seemed to be a unusual aircraft. And in some instances, folks want to receive a call back, but in most cases, it's just a call to say something loud flew over their home. So as I look at some of the other airports, the other representatives on the call here today, it kind of makes me feel like, well, I don't have a real noise problem. But I can tell you again, historically, what we have here at FXE is a longstanding program that entailed a lot of community outreach, tenant outreach as well, and also working with the air traffic control tower to help us ensure that we don't have as many noise complaints. And so the numbers that you are seeing now, as it's represented here, is a significant decrease from what we were in our heyday, which would have been as much as 700, 800 calls a month. And that's going back to 2007, 2008. Obviously, the month of January, being we're in South Florida, I think everyone else is in cold country. But in South Florida, windows and doors open up and folks want to hang out around their patio and the pool and so forth. And so typically those months we see a significant uptick, January, February, and so forth. So with what you do see, that's pretty much the highest we encounter on a monthly basis during that spring timeframe. And typically in the summer, it gets hot, so windows and doors get closed up, air conditioning comes on, and the calls are reduced significantly. Unless there's some other scenario where our main runway is shut down for construction work, which is something I experienced just a couple of weeks ago. We did see an uptick in calls for residents under that crosswind runway. But once we explained to them that the main runway was shut down for construction work, they understood and just wanted to know how much longer it would last. So it's more of the concern as to a complaint.
Now, for when there's known construction happening like that, do you try, is there any kind of proactive outreach that the airport does to let the people who are under that crosswind know that this is going to come, to maybe like head off some of those calls at the beginning? Or it's really, I guess, like you said, dependent on the season and other things that are happening. So you kind of take them as they come in.
Yes, we do work with our public affairs office, and we'll let them know also that there will be a shutting down of the main runway. So let residents under both of those flight paths to the southeast and the northwest know that if they experience any airplanes overhead, it's because a construction project is going on. And that is typically done through, now that we have the social media platforms and so forth, the next doors and what have you. But also a flyer is placed in the water bill for all the residents that would be impacted. But of course, I think as most of us who now, when we receive some bills, it's okay, let me go straight to the bill. Whatever else is in that envelope, it's going in the garbage. So, I think for those calls we received, that's what happened.
Okay. Well, great. I'm going to stop sharing now. And Rufus, I'm assuming people on the call know who you are, but you have such a decorated resume. I wasn't sure if you wanted to give a little bit of background about yourself as well. As we go into this.
Yeah, certainly. I'm sure, I often get this, that I don't speak much about myself, but I've been with the city for 22 years. As a matter of fact, Monday was my 22nd anniversary. And I did start here as an airport operations aide, executive. Prior to executive, I worked at FLL for a couple of years and had the opportunity to come to FXE. FXE is owned and operated by the city of Fort Lauderdale. And so and working in the operations division, gained a great bit of knowledge at the airport. Was able to dabble in everything. It wasn't just operations. Even with the noise abatement program, was able to dabble in that as well and get to learn it and so forth. Had the opportunity to move up to the airport operations supervisor. And again, I never really thought it would go any further than that, but the assistant airport manager position became available. And for the last 5 years, actually 6 years, I've been the airport director.
Great. Well, thank you so much for providing that. Now, we're back to this more informal conversation. If anybody else wants to either share their camera or speak up, you can also put questions in the chat. I do have a question in the chat right now for the panel members. So we're just going to talk amongst ourselves, I guess, unless anybody else wants to weigh in with anything or experience at your own airports. I mean, feel free. But to start off the question, I get it really is for any of the panel members here. Are noise issues a significant hurdle to any high priority capital improvements at your facilities? And then I would follow that up with, if they are, what are you doing to address that, or how do you manage those expectations of your community, the priorities that your leadership has, and kind of how to take the next steps forward? And I'm going to start with Brian on this one.
Yeah, it's a good question. Here at Louisville, we have as many airports do. We have a community noise forum, and that noise forum meets, every other month. And what we do at that meeting, we talk about all the issues and all the complaints and what we're doing with Part 150 and our sound installation program. But we also talk about we're going through a master plan update right now. We also so we talk about master plan, we talk about ALP, and we talk about projects that are going to be affected, the flow or the around the field, so that community noise forum group can take that information out to the community and kind of let them know what we're doing. But we try to communicate as much as we can with our folks. As far as the projects that we do, I mean, we do a lot of, obviously, all the airfield flat work, and we are constantly closing runways to do that work. So we keep people updated with that type of work. But that's kind of how we communicate what goes on here on the field in general. That's the very quick version.
Okay. Dan, how about you? Any hurdles for the capital improvements that you have to overcome?
That's a very difficult question, and I was kind of hoping you weren't going to answer me or to ask me to answer this. I'm very glad that we're all meeting in an informal setting like this, because the fact of the matter is, whether or not your airport has a noise problem or any kind of difficulties dealing with the community, at the end of the day, we still have an airport to run. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, it is very rare that community uproar or community disapproval of the airport actually has any effect on the way the airport runs. So here at CLT, we are in the middle of an EA process for a 4th parallel runway. It is expected that this will cause a lot of noise issues. Somewhat unfortunately, the way that Part 150 is written, very few residences that will be affected by this new runway will be eligible for soundproofing. Nearly all of them will be outside the 65 DNL contour. So this is kind of something that we're going to have to play by ear. I mean, we're doing a ton of outreach in advance of that. We have our airport noise forum as well that is, somewhat robust. But at the end of the day, we have a, multi-million, if not multi-billion-dollar project that is going to cause dissatisfaction in the community. And realistically, there's not a lot that we can do in advance to reduce that dissatisfaction. So I don't really have a good answer for you, is the short answer.
Well, new impacted people as well, they don't really know to pay attention to the airport and what's going on there. And if you are sending out those notices, I would say in my experience that certain communities don't know that it's going to affect them until it's already built and airplanes are flying overhead. So it's trying to, how do you get them to care about what you're doing at the airport and engage in an earlier process when they're just like, well, I live near the airport, but it's not an issue for me because either a flight track hasn't changed yet or a new runway hasn't been built yet. And then it's really hard to describe or let them know what's going to be coming potentially so that they can have that input there. Susan, a little differently in here, have you had any political posturings that have to happen that kind of help facilitate your community and what you've been doing with all of your programs? And then I don't know if there's any certain kind of just people in politics. I don't know. I forget there's a lot of people, there's a small percentage of the people who complain, but then sometimes those voices are very loudly heard. And so does that sway any like high decision makers when you are trying to get those capital improvements done at your airport?
I think that generally the local political scene is very supportive of the airport. We're a huge economic generator in the area, so mostly they're aligned with us. And even folks in the community, I have folks who live near the airport, might call me with a complaint, but say, actually, you know, my son works at FedEx, so it's tough for me to even call you right now. So folks understand the operation here and that it's kind of a necessary thing for the jobs it creates.
And Rufus, for your airport, you're not necessarily have a cargo hub where the people would be living right in the area and everything. How are you so successful with reducing your calls? And we have another comment from the chat here about community education programs, because you had a really high call volume. You seem to be able to bring that down and maintain that. Any advice you have for anybody with that workings?
Yeah, certainly. I'll try to keep this short, but I'll go back historically just to give some background. Back in the 1980s, one of neighboring municipalities actually sued the airport to restrict the size of aircraft that would come into the airport. And so that also created a situation where we couldn't extend the runway, the main runway, in the future. You know, I see one of my colleagues on the call here, and I remember back in the day, we would go to the different HOAs, homeowner association meetings, with a projector in hand and slides to make presentations to them, to make them aware of what we were doing at the airport to address their concerns and so forth. So I do recall from one of our Part 150 efforts, you know, with some of the recommendations and so forth, it was the case that, yeah, we would never extend the main runway. However, in 2015, we, you know, were able to collaborate with that same municipality and bring to their attention that the need for lengthening the runway. And surprisingly, they didn't seem to have an issue with it. Because they realized the economic impact that would have on their community. And it was more of a benefit for them as they're looking to get out of what they were known more as was a retirement community. But now you had younger families moving into the community, and they wanted hotels, they wanted more business. And they saw that as an opportunity where if the airplanes that are coming in can take on more fuel to depart and so forth, and not see that weight bearing restriction, then they would be able to benefit from that kind of business as well. So that lawsuit was taken off the books. We got rid of it, and they've been partnering with us on several events and so forth. And in response to some of the questions I'm seeing, you know, yeah, really what it gets down to is visiting those HOAs, having the conversations. We even gone to the extreme of when an individual doesn't understand our limitations as far as we can't tell an airplane to turn left here or turn right there, we bring them into the office to show them the ANOM system and a breakdown of how everything works. Take them over to the control tower to see, give them a tour of the cab, the tower cab, and to talk to some of the controllers. And so it really has been that community outreach effort, and letting them know that, yeah, we're here and we're not going anywhere, but we understand your concern. And, we've been working all these years to have these recommendations in place. If it is turning up I-95 was one of the recommendations. Also at nighttime, we will have aircraft depart to the west and arrive from the west. So it's not flying over the residential areas and so forth. So they understand all of that. They see our efforts. Again, one of the other things we did from the standpoint of ensuring that aircraft followed those procedures was having staffing overnight in the control tower. So all of those things really helped. And, as much as I don't have that burden now, I'm grateful for, my counterparts who were here before me and put some of those programs in place.
Well, thank you for your experience on that, because it also sounds like you got to overcome that runway limitation and were able to work with everybody on how that would go. Also with HOAs and new developments forming, or just the new demographic of those different communities and everything. So being able to explain it once isn't enough. It's a constant education that has to go out there to those communities to let them know what you've done. Of course, a new person will come in and say, like, nobody's ever thought about nighttime restrictions at the airport before. Let me suggest that this time. And being responded to with okay, here's the reasons why we can't in a nice way, as opposed to, oh, another person with that same thing, and being more dismissive is not really going to get you the reaction that you want in the nice, positive airport community relationship that you've all worked so hard to maintain.
Yeah.
Is any Michael, your question about helping reduce the calls, did you have any other direct questions for Rufus, or are there any specific items that you have been trying to overcome that you think just are not working, or anything you want to ask this group beyond your question about realizing why you operate the way you do? Does anybody actually point them to the FAA's website about, traffic flows, kind of what's in the control of like the aircraft control, wind direction, why a runway would operate in a certain direction certain days versus another? Are there any like readily available national reference or resources that you point your community members to, or is it all done in-house?
Well, hi, this is Mike Clow. I'm with Republic Airport in Long Island, New York. Previously a Southeast chapter member, and that's why Bob still invites me to a lot of these things. Thank you, Bob. We, similar to some of the other airports, we have an issue with very few people making calls, a lot of calls. We have one guy that made 64 calls last month. And that seems to be an issue, but regardless of how many times I say, airplanes have to take off into the wind, people go, but not over my house. And it's like, you can't get people to realize that when your house is 1.25 miles right off the end of the runway, we don't have any choice. They're going to take off into the wind. They're going to go out 1 mile, start to make their turn, and it's going to be right over that person's house. And it just, regardless of how many times I say it, I feel like I'm the broken record. Skip back, take off into the wind, safety. And, the answer still comes back, but why do they have to fly over my house? So.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience on that. I know that could be frustrating, especially when they won't when it seems like you're spending a lot of your energy and time and resources on one person over and over again. But yeah. So I'm going to go to another question in the chat, and any of the panel members or anybody on here, feel free to chime in. How do you anticipate your noise challenges will be different once the pandemic has fully passed? So people tend to not remember what it was, not going to be able to remember what it was in early 2020, like the first 3 months when things were normal and Dan had those record level. They're kind of going to remember what the past 3 to 6 months were like. And so they're going to say, it's never been this bad before. You've never been flying here. Like, they're lower than they've ever been. Why are you doing this? Like, have you either seen some of that already come as your operations have started to recover, or what are you doing to try and either get ahead of that, or just, you're going to take it as it comes?
So I can answer that. This is a really good question. These are the kind of questions I love to see about complaints. And that's relating to the actual kind of personal level of what could generate a complaint. So Ria, I think you have a slide a little bit later talking about aeronautical versus non-aeronautical factors in noise complaints. Yeah. And a number is often thrown around that something like 80% of noise complaints are related to some non-aeronautical reason. So here on this slide, you see things, let's see, what's a good one? Well, I don't see any that I really like on that one. But, one that I see often with my complainants is a lifestyle change. So either a new baby, perhaps, or moving house, or retiring, or working from home. So, when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden, 90% of people in the Charlotte area are now working from home. They are now home to hear the airplanes that fly over during the day, when typically if they were in a work office, they wouldn't hear that. So I kind of suspect that once things begin to normalize, people return to the office, if that indeed happens, I think the number of complaints will drop, at least with CLT.
Yeah, I would. I've seen that with other airports that I help their noise offices with and everything. It usually has to do with a change, a social change, like you were saying, a retirement. They're now home all the time. And with COVID, all those changes kind of happened right when the operations were also at their lowest, since that kind of all hit at once. And so trying to see, as things were starting to recover, was it going to be delayed? Were new people going to start to worry about that? Did they have bigger worries in their life, so they weren't going to complain about it? Once they, sorted that out and were more comfortable with whatever else was going on with them, now they can kind of turn their attention out to another area of their life, like the aircraft flying overhead, and give energy and attention to that. And so what I've been noticing is that it has to do with a change, not either in their own life, but also it could be at the airport. So if there's even something in the news that triggers their attention towards it, or some kind of article that they read, or something that other community members are sharing, those can kind of also spike your complaints and people's more interest and attention towards it. Has anybody else seen that kind of with their airport, where those you might be doing the same thing you always do at your airport, but other kind of external factors that kind of can't be controlled for changing, that all of a sudden you get this big influx of noise complaints that you now have to spend your time on? Brian,
here in Louisville, it happens that way. If we have a announcement or something on local TV that says, hey, we're starting a sound installation program in this certain neighborhood, that next week we'll have complaints in other neighborhoods about the noise. So yeah, that phenomenon, that happens. It happens here a lot.
Yeah. We only have a few more minutes in this session. It ends at 10:45. So I want to ask this last question, which is very interesting because it's going to be a new thing that we're all going to be dealing with eventually, I would think. but looking ahead to electric aircraft and how it could transform your ability to operate in an urban environment. So not necessarily your normal commercial 737s or your cargo flights right now, but the new entrance of urban air mobility and how that might be working its way around your airport, and how you as an airport noise office, if something's flying overhead, you're going to get the complaints, even if it didn't originate from your airport. That happens with a lot of helicopter activity a lot of the time, or other training aircraft. So anybody have any words of wisdom on that they want to share?
What I can share with the group is, as I mentioned, we have a downtown helistop landing pad that's above the parking garage. And that was built back in the late 90s, early 2000. Obviously, the downtown core at the time isn't what it is today, or wasn't what it is today. And so as more high rises started popping up in the downtown core, we did start receiving calls, but it wasn't noise calls, to be honest with you. It was just the visual of, why is this helicopter flying through the air? I now have to close my curtains because I feel someone is, looking in on my privacy and so forth. But as I've personally gone to some of those new high rises, you can't hear the aircraft, to be honest with you. So as it relates to the electrified propulsion type aircraft, I would expect there not to be a noise problem, but just the intrusion of more activity in the air. But if most people enjoy that city life, if you will, I would expect to be no different from being in New York City. Typically you're looking down, walking to where you're going to, and so it might just be the difference of the intrusion of seeing more activity in the air. 200 feet, you're 27th floor of a building, 40th floor of a building, and you're seeing aircraft traffic in the downtown core.
Yeah, Susan, what about you? I'm going to have to turn this question over to you before I turn it back to Cody to give closing words. So
Yeah, sure. I haven't really given too much thought about electric aircraft, but I think what really bothers people, kind of riffing off what Rufus was just saying, is that they're probably not going to be on a schedule. They'll be unexpected. The flight paths won't follow normal flight paths. And that's kind of what we've seen with the military traffic is we don't know when they're showing up, which is a challenge. People want to know in advance, and we don't know in advance. So that's been really challenging. We don't have data on the military aircraft. We don't know where they're flying. We don't know altitudes. So that's been challenging in responding to any complaints about them, because we're kind of in the dark and don't have any real power to stop them from coming here. So I think that will be maybe some similar challenges when electric aircraft arrive.
yeah, good points on that. Thank you. Cody, any closing words for our group? I want to thank everybody for joining us and thank our panelists for their time today and sharing a little bit of their experience with this. And it's a problem that, despite the best efforts, does not seem to go away. Rufus seems to have something figured out over there, but
I'll add also, Rhea, one of the things that has really helped us a tool is the WebTrack app. And, it's the scenario of when you get that call saying that an airplane just flew over my house at 200 feet. And, you check the flight track and no, it was 1,200 feet. Well, that's not true. How do you know? So by having this WebTrack app now, we simply can let the residents know, hey, you have access to this. Put in your address, the time, and you'll get the information just as well as we get it. And so now there isn't that need for a phone call or to have that dispute, whether it was 200 feet or 1,200 feet. And I think that has really made a difference for us as well, is having that tool available to share with the community so they can see for themselves the actual flight path, as well as the altitude, the amount of noise that's being generated. And again, the education of 65 dB is no louder than, that lawnmower or motorcycle driving by, or if it is your washing machine or dryer, going off in the house. And that, I think, really does help us in our scenario. I know for the other folks on the phone, they're at a commercial service airport, but from the GA standpoint, that constant outreach with the residents has made a difference for us.
Well, thank you, Rhea, and our panel for your contributions to today's conversation. Very interesting stuff. Looks like our noise officers might soon become noise and privacy officers or some permutation thereof. Rufus, as someone who has taken the 1 hour training flight down the East Coast at 300 feet in the Piper, I can definitely say the temptation to look in on the condos to see what's going on is there. So I assume folks, not me, of course, but other folks might eventually face that other temptation with the eVTOLs and other similar aircraft. So very insightful comments there. Folks, just want to thank HMMH again for sponsoring this month's coffee conversation. If you are a member of the corporate committee, you do have the ability for a very nominal fee to sponsor an upcoming coffee conversation with the panel and subject of your choice. So I'm going to drop my email address in the comments here, but of course, feel free to reach out directly to Bob if you want to participate. And thanks again, folks, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.